You are in the wrong building, and quite frankly, you are disturbing the atmosphere. Get out! The words hung in the sterile, chilled air of Sovereign Capital Bank, sharp as a guillotine blade. Preston Reed, the branch manager, didn't even look up from his tablet when he said it. He stood behind the polished mahogany counter, clad in an Italian suit that cost more than most people's cars, radiating an aura of untouchable arrogance. Standing before him was Margaret Maggie Vance, a 74-year-old black woman clutching a handbag that had seen better decades. Her coat was slightly damp from the Chicago rain, her shoes were sensible and worn, and her hands, gnarled by arthritis and years of labor, trembled ever so slightly. Not from fear, but from a rage she had learned to suppress over a lifetime. "Sir," Maggie's voice was soft, carrying the rasp of age but the steel of conviction. "I have an account here. I simply need to make a withdrawal for my foundation." Preston finally looked up, and his laugh was a dry, cruel sound that echoed off the marble floors. "A withdrawal? For a foundation?" He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on the frayed hem of her coat with visceral disgust. "Listen, Grandma, the soup kitchen is 3 blocks down. This bank is for people who actually have assets. High-net-worth individuals, not for whatever this is." He gestured vaguely at her existence, as if she were a stain on his pristine floor. The humiliation was physical, a hot flush rising up Maggie's neck, but she stood her ground. "I am a high-net-worth individual," she stated, her chin lifting, "and I am asking you to do your job." To understand the gravity of this moment, we must rewind 6 hours. The morning had begun in a house that defied expectations. From the outside, Maggie's home in the South Side was modest, a brick bungalow indistinguishable from its neighbors. But inside, it was a sanctuary of quiet luxury and immense history. The kitchen smelled of jasmine tea and old paper. Maggie stood by the window, watering her African violets, looking at the framed photograph of her late husband, Robert Vance. Robert, who had returned from Vietnam with nothing but shrapnel in his leg and a brilliant mind for engineering. Together, they had patented a filtration system that was now used in factories across the globe. They had built an empire from scrap metal and sheer will, amassing a fortune that they kept quietly tucked away in Sovereign Capital Bank for 40 years. Robert had passed away 5 years ago, leaving Maggie to manage the Vance estate alone. Today was significant. It was the anniversary of the day they opened their first joint account in 1984. Every year on this day, Maggie withdrew a substantial sum to fund the Vance Scholars Program, a lifeline for underprivileged students who, like her and Robert, had brilliance but no backing. She had prepared the documents with meticulous care, the withdrawal slip for $3.2 million, her ID, her platinum access card. She chose to take the bus, not the Bentley sitting in her garage, because Robert always said, "Never forget the ground you walked on before you learned to fly." She loved the rhythm of the city, the community, the grounding reality of public transit. But as she walked into the bank, surrounded by glass, steel, and people who looked through her, that reality shifted into something hostile. Preston Reed wasn't just dismissing a customer. He was dismissing a human being based on a visual prejudice so deeply ingrained it was reflexive. He snapped his fingers at the security guard, a burly man named Officer Frank. "Frank, escort this woman out. She's soliciting inside the branch." Maggie's grip on her purse tightened until her knuckles turned ashen. "I'm not soliciting," she said, her voice rising just enough to turn heads. "I am trying to access my money. My name is Margaret Vance, and I demand to see a teller." The lobby, filled with well-dressed patrons in bespoke suits and designer dresses, went silent. A woman in a Chanel suit whispered to her companion, eyeing Maggie with a mixture of pity and annoyance. Preston sighed, a theatrical exhale of burden. "Mrs. Vance, is it? Look, I don't know what kind of scam you're running, or whose checkbook you found, but if you don't leave in 10 seconds, I'm pressing the silent alarm. We have zero tolerance for fraud." He leaned in, his cologne cloying and expensive. "Go back to where you belong." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just a refusal of service, it was an erasure of her identity. Maggie felt the ghost of Robert beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "Stand tall, Maggie girl," he would have said. She reached into her bag to pull out the withdrawal slip again. "I have the paperwork right here." Preston recoiled, as if she were pulling out a weapon. "Don't," he barked. "Frank, now! She's reaching for something!" The atmosphere snapped from uncomfortable to dangerous in a heartbeat. Frank stepped forward, his hand hovering over his taser. "Ma'am, step back!" Frank ordered, his voice booming. Maggie froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I'm just getting my documents," she pleaded, looking around for an ally, for anyone to see the madness of this situation. But all she saw were eyes, cold, judging, indifferent eyes. They saw an old black woman in a worn coat and assumed the worst. They didn't see the matriarch of a manufacturing empire. They didn't see the philanthropist. They saw a threat. And in that moment, Maggie realized that no matter how many millions sat in the vault beneath her feet, to Preston Reed, she was nothing. But Preston Reed was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, a mistake that would cost him everything. He picked up the phone, his eyes locked on Maggie with a predator's gleam. "Get the police down here," he said into the receiver, loud enough for the gallery to hear. "We have an attempted robbery in progress." The wail of sirens cut through the rainy afternoon, a sound that usually signaled safety, but now heralded a nightmare. Inside Sovereign Capital Bank, time seemed to warp, stretching into an agonizing tableau of shame. Maggie Vance sat on a hard plastic chair near the entrance, where Preston had ordered her to wait. "Away from the respectable clients." Her hands were folded on her lap, trembling not from the cold, but from the sheer indignity of being guarded like a criminal by Officer Frank. Customers who entered the bank skirted around her, clutching their purses tighter, casting suspicious glances. Preston stood by his glass-walled office, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. He felt powerful. He felt righteous. He believed he was protecting his bank from a senile grifter or a sophisticated con artist. He had no idea that he was standing on the precipice of his own destruction. The heavy glass doors swung open, and 2 police officers strode in, bringing with them the scent of damp wool and authority. Officer Higgins, a tall man with a buzz cut and a weary expression, took the lead, followed by Officer Martinez, younger, sharper, with eyes that scanned the room critically. Preston rushed to meet them, his demeanor shifting instantly from bully to sycophant. "Officers, thank God, she's over there!" He pointed a manicured finger at Maggie. "Attempted to pass a fraudulent withdrawal slip for $3 million. Can you believe the audacity?" Higgins looked at Maggie, then back at Preston. $3 million. Did she have a weapon?" Preston lowered his voice conspiratorially. "She reached into her bag when I confronted her. I didn't wait to find out." Higgins nodded, his hand resting instinctively near his belt. He approached Maggie, towering over her small frame. "Ma'am, stand up, slowly." Maggie rose, her knees aching. "Officer, this is a misunderstanding. I am an account holder here." Higgins ignored her plea. "Turn around! Hands on the wall!" The command hit her like a physical blow. "Officer, I am 74 years old. I have arthritis." "Do it now, ma'am," Higgins barked. Tears pricked Maggie's eyes, hot, angry tears she refused to shed. She turned, placing her hands against the cold marble wall. She felt the officer's hands patting her down, checking her coat pockets, her sides. It was a violation so profound it stole the breath from her lungs. This was the body that had carried children, the body that had built a business, the body Robert had loved. Now it was being treated like contraband. Officer Martinez, meanwhile, picked up her purse. "I'm going to need to search this," Martinez said. "You have no right," Maggie whispered, her face pressed against the wall. "I haven't done anything." "Probable cause, ma'am," Preston piped up from behind, enjoying the show. "She's claiming to have millions. It's clearly a delusion or a scam." Martinez dumped the contents of the purse onto the nearest desk. The sound of items scattering was deafening in the silent bank. A bottle of blood pressure medication rattled, a packet of tissues, a worn leather wallet, a set of house keys, and a small velvet box containing Robert's Purple Heart medal, which she always carried for luck. Preston stepped forward, picking up the medication bottle with 2 fingers. "State aid, I assume," he sneered. "And what's this?" He poked at the velvet box. "Stolen trinkets?" Maggie spun around, breaking protocol. Don't you touch that! That belongs to my husband! Higgins grabbed her arm. Stay against the wall! He is desecrating a war hero's medal. Maggie cried out, her voice cracking. Martinez opened the wallet. Inside, there was a driver's license and a single black credit card. Heavy, metal, the kind that didn't have a limit. Martinez frowned, pulling it out. Sovereign Capital? Obsidian Tier? Martinez looked at the card, then at the woman in the faded coat. Hey, Higgins, look at this! Higgins glanced over. Probably a fake. Good quality, though. Preston laughed. Obsidian cards are invitation only for clients with over $50 million in assets. Does she look like she has $50 million? He gestured to her worn shoes. It's a prop, a forgery. The humiliation was total. Maggie stood there, detained, searched, and mocked, while a lobby full of people watched. A teenager in the corner was filming it on his phone. She could see the red recording light. This moment, the worst of her life, was being broadcast to the world. But amidst the shame, a cold, hard resolve began to crystallize in Maggie's chest. They wanted to judge her by the cover? Fine. She would make them read the whole book, and the ending would be tragic for them. She took a deep breath, composing herself with a dignity that seemed to confuse Officer Martinez. Officer, Maggie said, her voice steady now, devoid of the earlier panic. I am requesting that you make one phone call before you arrest me. If I am a fraud, it will only confirm your suspicions, but if I am not, you will want to have made this call. Higgins rolled his eyes. We don't do requests, lady. Call Arthur Sterling, Maggie said clearly. The name hung in the air. Preston froze. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Arthur Sterling was the CEO of the entire Sovereign Capital Regional Division, a man Preston had met only once, from a distance. You know the CEO's name, Preston scoffed, recovering his bravado. Anyone can Google that. I have his personal number, Maggie continued, locking eyes with Martinez. It is in my contact list under Arthur. Call him. Tell him Margaret Vance is being detained at the downtown branch. Martinez looked at the obsidian card, then at the old woman. Doubt crept in. Check the phone, Martinez muttered to Higgins. Higgins sighed, grabbed Maggie's phone from the pile and unlocked it. She gave the code without hesitation. He scrolled. There's an Arthur S. here. He pressed dial, putting it on speaker. The phone rang once, twice. The sound echoed through the silent bank lobby, amplified by the tension that had thickened the air like smoke. Preston crossed his arms, leaning back against the counter, an expression of bored amusement plastered on his face. He expected a disconnected line, or perhaps an accomplice pretending to be the CEO. This is going to be good, he whispered to Sarah, the terrified young teller standing behind him. Watch her squirm. Then the line connected. Maggie? The voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was deep, authoritative, and laced with genuine warmth. Is everything all right? You don't usually call on a Tuesday? The blood drained from Preston Reed's face so fast it left him looking gray. Officer Higgins froze, the phone still held out in his hand like a grenade. Officer Martinez's eyes widened. It was the voice from the corporate training videos. It was Arthur Sterling. Mr. Sterling? Higgins stammered, his earlier aggression evaporating into thin air. This is Officer Higgins, Chicago PD. We are at the downtown branch. There was a pause on the line, a silence so heavy it felt physical. Why do you have Mrs. Vance's phone, officer? Arthur's tone had shifted. The warmth was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp edge. Is she hurt? Is she safe? She's detained, sir. Higgins swallowed hard. The branch manager, Mr. Reed, reported a fraud attempt, a withdrawal of $3 million. Fraud? The word exploded from the speaker. Put Preston Reed on the phone, now! Higgins practically threw the phone at Preston. Preston caught it with trembling hands. Mr. Sterling! Preston squeaked, his voice cracking. Sir, I was just following protocol. This woman, she came in looking, well, disheveled. She claimed to have an account, but she didn't fit the profile. And when she tried to withdraw such a massive amount... Shut up! Arthur's voice was low, dangerous. You didn't check her account number? I I assumed it was fake, sir. She didn't look like... You assumed. Arthur cut him off, his voice rising in fury. You judged. You profiled. Do you have any idea who you are holding? Margaret Vance is the largest individual depositor in this entire region. She and her late husband are the reason that branch even exists. They bailed this bank out in the '08 crash. The revelation hit the room like a shockwave. The customers gasped. The teenager filming the encounter zoomed in on Preston's face, which was now a mask of pure terror. Maggie stood by the wall, her hands no longer trembling. She reached out and took her purse back from the desk, slowly, deliberately replacing her items. She picked up Robert's medal, dusting off the velvet box with a tenderness that made Martinez look away in shame. I am 2 blocks away, Arthur roared over the phone. If she's still in handcuffs, if anyone has disrespected her further, I will personally ensure your careers are over before I walk through that door. The line went dead. The silence that followed was deafening. Preston lowered the phone, his hand shaking so violently he nearly dropped it. He looked at Maggie, really looked at her for the first time. He saw the quality of the leather of her handbag, worn but handcrafted. He saw the steel in her spine. He saw the immense power he had mistaken for poverty. Mrs. Vance, Preston began, his voice a breathless whisper. I had no idea. Please, you have to understand from my perspective. Your perspective, Maggie interrupted, her voice calm but icy, is that a black woman in a wool coat cannot possibly be wealthy. Your perspective is that dignity is reserved for those who wear designer labels. The glass doors burst open again, and this time it was Arthur Sterling. He didn't walk. He stormed in, flanked by 2 corporate attorneys. He ignored the police, ignored the staff, and went straight to Maggie. Maggie, he said, breathless, taking her hands in his. I am so sorry. He looked at the police officers. Get out. Unless you want our legal department to file a suit for unlawful detention and harassment by the end of the hour, you will leave. Higgins and Martinez didn't need to be told twice. They mumbled apologies and retreated, leaving Preston alone to face the music. Arthur turned to Preston. The fury in his eyes was terrifying. Pull up her account, Arthur commanded. Do it, on the big screen. Preston stumbled to the computer, his fingers fumbling over the keys. He typed in the account number from the slip he had mocked earlier. The main monitor behind the telestation flickered to life. The aftermath was swift and brutal, a public execution of a career. Arthur Sterling didn't wait for HR. He didn't wait for a review board. Standing there in the lobby, with customers watching and phones recording, he delivered the verdict. Mr. Reed, Arthur said, his voice devoid of pity, hand over your keys and your access card. You are terminated, effective immediately. And you will be blacklisted from this financial institution and any of its affiliates. Preston looked up, tears streaming down his face. Sir, please, I have a mortgage, I have kids. It was a mistake. A mistake is a typo, Arthur replied coldly. What you did was a choice. You chose to strip a human being of their dignity because you didn't like how they looked. You chose cruelty, and now you will live with the consequences. Security guard Frank was also relieved of duty on the spot. As Preston was escorted out of the building by the very guards he used to command, the customers in the lobby began to clap. It started slow, then swelled into a roar of applause. But Maggie didn't smile. This wasn't a victory. It was a tragedy that had been necessary. Arthur turned to Maggie, his face softening. Maggie, let's go to my office. We'll process the transfer there. And I will personally add a substantial donation from the bank to your foundation as an apology. Maggie nodded, but before she left the main floor, she turned to the young teller, Sarah, who had been crying quietly in the corner. Child, Maggie said gently. Sarah looked up, terrified. You saw what happened today, Maggie said. You saw how easy it was for him to hate. Don't you ever let that poison into your heart. You treat the janitor with the same respect as the CEO. Do you hear me? Yes, ma'am, Sarah sobbed. I promise. The video of the incident went viral within hours. The hashtag #YourDignityHasNoPrice trended globally. It showed the search, the mockery, and the glorious revelation of the bank balance. But for Maggie, the viral fame meant nothing. What mattered was the check she held in her hand an hour later. $3.2 million plus a $500,000 apology donation from Sovereign Capital. She walked out of the bank, the rain having stopped, leaving the pavement glistening under the afternoon sun. She didn't get into a limousine. She walked to the bus stop. As she sat on the bench, waiting for the number 22 bus, she opened the velvet box and looked at Robert's medal. "We did it, Bob," she whispered. "We taught them." 6 months later, the Vance Community Center opened in the heart of the city. It was a state-of-the-art facility, providing scholarships, legal aid, and financial literacy courses to minority families. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Maggie stood on the stage, wearing the same coat she had worn to the bank. It was her armor. It was her statement. She looked out at the sea of faces, young students who would now go to college, families who would keep their homes. She took the microphone. "They judged me by my coat," she told the crowd, her voice strong and clear. "They thought my value was written on my clothes. But we know the truth. Your worth is written in your actions, in your kindness, and in your resilience." The crowd cheered, a sound far louder and sweeter than the silence of the bank. And somewhere in the city, working a minimum wage job at a warehouse, Preston Reed saw the news on a breakroom TV. He watched the woman he had called a beggar change the world. He looked down at his own worn hands, finally understanding the lesson, far too late. Never judge a book by its cover, for you never know when you are standing in the presence of a queen in disguise. Wealth whispers, but dignity roars. If this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth. Together, let's share stories that matter. See you in the next episode.